The quest continues into pro stock history at DBG.
What's up, guys? Tim Halstead here with DragBoss Garage. So guess what? Another episode. I haven't made a video in quite a while, so I said I better get going on it. I'm feeling a lot better. Thank you for caring, you guys. I appreciate that. So I'm going to talk about camshafts. Nothing crazy. I'm not going to get really technical on it. I just kind of want to do a brief overview of pro stock cams. I have a few examples back here, including Captain Cobra Jet's cam. That's Carl Holbrook. He was I believe, a super stock racer. I know he ran at Cleveland. His son Mike has an engine shop in Michigan. I'm going to hook up with you, Mike. Maybe you'll see this video. But I have his cam from one of his old motors and a few other pro stock rollers. I'd like to go over the profiles and kind of give you an idea of what they ran back then with their technology, and then kind of compare it to the DragBoss cam, which I have some specs from Tony Bischoff. And I'm going to kind of do an update on that also on the DragBoss 427. So here's what we got. You know what camshafts are out there: hydraulic, solid lifter, and solid roller. Those are basically the three kinds. Now there's other things that have different lifter configurations, such as I think Mopar had a mushroom type lifter for NASCAR. Ronnie Kirkpatrick told me about that. It has a set. They had other type of lifters I'm sure of, but I don't know all the types. I'm just going to give a brief overview. And basically we're just going to talk about solid roller cams. You know, for a pro stock motor or something in the upper end, you're not going to run a hydraulic roller or a solid lifter. Those are good for street cams. We'll talk about that as we get into maybe talking about this 354 Cleveland. We'll go into some street cam specs because a lot of guys are into that scene. They're not all running, 800 horsepower Clevelands or trying to get an 800 horsepower Cleveland. They're happy with 500 horsepower, and on the street, that's pretty nasty. Even 450 is pretty nasty on the street. So let's talk about what they ran. Well, they ran solid roller cams. Now, I can't remember who the first guy that invented the solid roller. I almost think it was Howard's or something like that, or maybe even Iskey. I don't know. You guys chime in on that. That'll be something we can discuss in the comments. But as far as what it goes for cams, here's what we have right now. So I kind of wanted to put a perspective on some cam, lift, and duration numbers so you can kind of see where we're talking about. Now, I sponsor Jimmy Huff. He's in the Sega race series, which is a wicked series, man. They're all stick cars. A lot of them are running Cleveland power, or at least Cleveland type heads. Those things launch like crazy. So here's a combination that he put together. Now, this is a 340 cubic inch Cleveland. It's really a cleaver because he's using a Windsor block. And that's what I want to do when I build my pro stock Cleveland, is use a Cleveland block. And then we're going to use the one that Mike Shreve is sending me, because most of it's all the work's done. But here's an example. So he's running 340 cubic inches of cleaver. It's 15-to-1. So his cam is, let's see, the Lobe lifts are like 488 and 498. And then you times that by the rocker ratio. I mean, you're looking at like 844 and 861 lift. Duration is 279 and 290 at 050. And I think it's in a 110. I don't know what he has it in. But that duration, that's like 11 degrees split. Here's a cam here. This is a crane roller. Now this came from Carl Holbrook's car, and they called him Captain Cobra Jet because he was an FE guy. He raced a Mustang, was pretty successful with that. But let's look at this thing. This was a crane cam, if I'm not mistaken. And here's what it is. Here's the part numbers. It's an R280, so I want to say that's got 280 duration, but I'm not sure because I don't know much about these cams. And they kind of give the part numbers of 44, 68-25-10. What does it mean to me? I don't know. Now, with that said, here's my plan. Now, I hooked up with a guy named Spiro Jannings, I think it is. Now, he owns a company called Red Line Racing Cams. He does a lot of undercover stuff, a lot of crazy stuff. He's done cams for a Panzer tank, I think. He does a lot of foreign type motors, BMW cams, a lot of the exotic stuff, Ferraris, and he does a lot of super stock cams, reconditions them, makes them. He's got a cam grinder there. So him and I have been talking back and forth. So I'm going to send him a couple of these cams, and he's going to run them on the profile to give me a cams card for him and kind of clean them up. There's a couple areas that look like they're questionable on one of these cams, and I want to make sure it's worth trying to run. Let's give you another example. Now, he told me the best cams for pro stock cars were General Kinetics, and that's Harold Brookshire. That guy was the king of roller cams from what I remember or heard. You guys can chime in because I bet you guys out there know that. But here's an example of a cam. So this one here, and I can't remember, I got a couple of these from Richard Lavoie. He's a buddy of mine. I buy a lot of parts from him in Canada. And I got one of these from Jay Cushman. But just for example, this cam right here, General Kinetics. Supposedly this cam came from Bob Glidden. Who knows where it came from? But just for example, these cams here, this General Kinetics is 324 and 328. And that sounds like the duration at 050. How about this for lift? It's got a lobe lift of 472, which comes out to about 817 lift on a 108 center line. Now here's the thing. I hear footsteps. So it could be Mike Weeks coming on in to DBG while we're filming this episode about pro stock cams. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, I got to catch up with making videos, and I said, hey, you know what? I might as well get going on them while I'm waiting for you to show up.
Looks like you got a good collection.
Yeah, just old parts.
I understand.
What's up, guys? Tim Halstead with DragBoss Garage. Welcome back to the channel. Hey, that previous part of the video that you were watching and you're here now, that was made quite a few months ago when Mike Weeks stopped by. We took a road trip. I made a video on that. Went to see my buddy's parts that he had. He passed away, John Micasina, R.I.P. John. He had the 67 Fairlane with a 497 cubic inch FE motor, all aluminum. It was a bad car. I put the video up on. I never finished the video on pro stock cams. And since I've had such a hit with the most outlawed engine in racing history, Ford 351 Cleveland, I got up to 12,000 subscribers. Thank you guys, I appreciate that. I told my wife, I said, you know, when I get to 10,000, I'm probably not gonna do this anymore. I don't know if I have enough material and you guys are interested in it. But I can see now that pro stock is where it's at, and that's what you guys wanna see. And that's a quest I'm on, is to build these two pro stock motors, dyno, and see what they do for horsepower. Because you gotta know, back then, they never dynoed those old pro stock Clevelands, or any of the motors back then. Those guys were racing to eat, let alone have big explosions of money for whatever. But let me do this. Someone said I give too many shout outs, but you know what? That's because I recognize people that need to be recognized, people that help me out, that I can bring this entertainment to you, stuff you're not gonna see anywhere else. So I gotta give big shout out to Richard Lavoie. He's a buddy of mine. We've been dealing with stuff. I buy a lot of parts from him. I got these 3 cams I mentioned earlier. Check this out. I got this in the mail yesterday. Yeah, this is where you get caught messing around. I'll tell you, the guy packs well, very well. Now this is something you don't see very often. Well, they're on eBay if you can find them. And I have something similar, but it's pretty worn. It's a shifter. I'll wait till you see it. Good job, Richard, on the packing. I always like opening packages like Christmas. And the kids like to do it. You've seen the videos we made. Now, I don't want to be dropping it like I dropped that intake that no one even mentioned, except for one person, maybe two, saw that blooper I left in there. Oh yeah. Brand new. NOS. Hurst ramrod for a top loader. Yeah, it's gonna be cool. Now I have that Mr. Gasket, but that thing's definitely worn compared to this. This will be a nice tight shift. Thanks, Richard. That shifter, the ramrod, is gonna go into the 69 Mustang of Andrea's. We're gonna put that in with this 354 cubic inch, 600 horsepower Cleveland. See if we can get a 1050 out of that car before we turn to the Boss 429 clone. So, hey, another quick shout out and we're back to the channel. You, Daniel Wilson, thanks for all you do in support of DragBoss Garage. So let's get in to camshafts. Now, when we had just finished the conversation, we were talking about the 108-degree intake lobe centerline. So if we're gonna do a camshaft talk on pro stock cams, we need to get the basics on the cams themselves. We already mentioned about the 3 different types in general that were used currently. Now, when we talk about a roller cam, what we're talking about is the lifter wheel. That the lifter wheel, set of lifters here, has a roller wheel. Now, these are Isky Cam red zone lifters. These have actually a bushing in here rather than needle bearings. But that's what we mean by a roller cam. And I think what we need to do is clarify some of the terms that we're going to be talking about. Because if you understand these terms, when we talk about pro stock cams, I think you're going to get it a lot better. And what I'm trying to do is uncover the secrets of pro stock and at least figure out what they ran for horsepower and how fast they're going and the things they used to get there. And in this particular case, camshafts. So let's talk about terms. One of the most misunderstood terms is lobe separation angle. So let's talk about lobe separation angle. It's ground into the camshaft. You can't change it. It's the angle between the intake and the exhaust center line of the lobe. So you're looking at the two center lines, and it's the angle between the two. It doesn't change. It's grounded to the cam. What that does is change where the peak power comes in. So now that you got the angles and you understand that, when we change that separation angle, we move where the peak power is in the power curve. So if you make that lobe separation angle bigger, you're moving the power band this way. If you make it smaller, you're moving it back this way. So that's how that works. Now here's something that you can change, and that's called the intake lobe center line. And what that is you're changing where that intake lobe starts to open in relation to the power curve. If you advance it and start that cycle earlier, you're gonna pick up low end torque. If you retard it, it's gonna move the power curve this way. You're gonna lose torque. It's gonna run hotter too with a more leaner engine compared to more rich with advancement. So those are the things that you need to know to understand this discussion. Then there's lift. How far is that valve opening from the camshaft, the lift of that camshaft in thousandths of an inch? And then there's the duration. How long is that camshaft keeping that valve open? The most horsepower you're gonna make is with the most air and fuel in the cylinder at time of ignition. Now I'm not gonna get into details. There might be some other specific time. I'm just being general terms so we can all be on the same page. So in this case, that cam that I had talked about that I got from Jay Cushman that was supposed to be from Bob Glidden. Well, so is the motor plate on this engine here, which you'll see in other pictures. Who knows where it came from? I just want to give you generalities of what size that cam is. Now, I told you the last thing I said that it was 108 centerline, and that's what it says on the cam. So that doesn't tell me it's a separation angle because it says CL. So I don't know what the separation angle is on that camshaft. It could be 109, it could be 110, we don't know. We could figure it out though if we wanted to by using the dial indicator and a degree wheel. Now, I have another cam that I got from Richard LeBoy. It's also a General Kinetics cam, and I'm going to show you a picture of it right here. Because I'm not going to go into the specs, because you want to know something? It's the exact same cam. The only difference is the exhaust duration on that Glidden cam, if it came from him, is 328. Whereas on this cam I got from Richard, it's 329. In regards to the duration figures. Now, when you look at the lift numbers, though, the second cam that I got has a lobe lift of 472 and 425, and that's like 817 and 735 respectively. So, a healthy cam without a doubt. And like I said, those two cams are General Kinetics. And from what I've heard, Harold Brookshire, who used to work with General Kinetics back in the day, they made some of the best pro stock cams for Cleveland's. I don't know about other cars or manufacturers or whatever applications, but I know for Cleveland they were pretty well. Then he left and started his own company called Ultradyne. And I read some article where he had some financial trouble and actually kind of basically lost the company, and he's passed away now. So RIP, Harold Brookshire. I got a couple of your cams. I'd like to see what they could do. The cam I had mentioned before, that the one that I got from Carl Holbrook, Captain Cobra Jet. Now that's a crane roller. Now I will say this, I didn't mention this before, but he raced FE when he was Captain Cobra Jet. Now he must have raced to Cleveland because I got a couple of his cams, so I don't know much about his Cleveland history. That's why I want to talk to his son, Mike Holbrook, who still runs a machine shop in Michigan. So if you're watching this, Mike, I'd like to get a hold of you and maybe talk or do a live chat or something. So I told you about that cam. I have another cam that's a Lunati Cam, and there again, I don't have much on it. It's basically, it says that it's got I'll put a picture of it here. But basically it says 350/360. Now is that duration at 050 advertised? I have no idea, and it's got some numbers, but according to Richard, that came with a package, and that was also run by Carl Holbrook. Here's a pro stock cam from Sam Auxier Jr.'s Pinto. Look at that thing, 800 lift, minimum RPM, 5,500. Yeah, it's crazy. Thanks, Sam, for the specs. Let's kind of look at now, you've got the cam specs, look at the performance and kind of put it down and pin it down to something that we can understand. Those pro stock cars were running, you know, and let's just use arbitrary numbers, 855 at 155, somewhere in that range. Now let's put it in perspective. You guys know that I've been racing Clevelands for a long time, and there's two Clevelands that I've messed with on this YouTube channel. One is a 408 cubic inch and one is a 409 cubic inch. The 408 had ported heads from a long time ago from Modern Cylinder Heads, Jeff Klabowski, RIP Jeff. So he poured those heads, and I've ran that same cylinder head and actually the same cam for years. Never did much with it. It dynoed at 752 horsepower for 408 cubic inches. Then I had Darren Morgan do the heads. They're Ford A3 heads, aluminum. They're really just an aluminum version of a high port iron head. And I've got lots of videos on those, and we're not going to waste time on that. We can talk about that later. But I ended up wanting to rebuild it and having Darren do the head work. So he did head work and intake work, and I ended up having to bore it 35 over because I was worn. I coated the pistons for 2000ths and put it together. It's 409 cubic inches. Now, when I had dynoed that before at 408 cubic inches and at 409, at 409 it made 775 horsepower. And that's with Scott Cook's Air Supremacy intake and a billet APD Dominator. When it made 775, I also put 2-inch dyno headers on it. And that's where it really picked up horsepower. I think really the problem with the 409 is I have too much head on it and not enough engine. It doesn't have enough compression. It's only 13.3 or 13.35. The cam's too small, which I'm going to read it to you after this because it's for both engines. And you can see the horsepower that we made with that cam. Darren said you make that engine 14.5 to 1, put a bigger cam in it, it'll make 800 horsepower. That cam and those two engines, the 408 and the 409 Cleveland, is 273, 284 duration at 050, 744, 727 lift, 22 thousandths lash. Now that's a, let me think, it's a 109 and it's in at 105, if I remember correctly. So you see those horsepower numbers that engine made with 273 to 284 duration. This gets you to understand where these duration numbers are in the power band of these cars. Now someone had told me, oh, they don't leave at 9,000 or 9,500 or 10,000 RPM. And yeah, they did leave at that high RPM. That's how those Cleveland cylinder heads work with those huge ports. At high RPM and big cams, they can get more air and fuel in there and make more power. Now let's relate some of these numbers and kind of maybe put it all together. The cam that's in the 408 and 409 Cleveland, that 273, 284, made peak power at 7,600 with that duration. Now think about that. Bob Glidden cam or these other cams we had talked about, when they have like 324 and 328 duration, think of where that power band's going to be. If 7,600, you're looking more in the $8,000 range, right? 8,500, maybe more. What you're going to see now is a video I got from Dana Sniff when he was there. I think it was in 76, but he took this video with a Super 8 camera. It's so cool. But what you're going to hear is the cam in Glidden's Pinto. You listen to this sound and you tell me what you think about this cam. Because the next video you're going to see is my 409 Cleveland with a camshaft. You compare the two idles and think about that duration.
R.I.P. Bob Glidden. Thanks for all you did for the 351 Cleveland.
So you hopefully didn't get too much of the 409 Cleveland, but I'm pretty proud of that engine. That was the last engine that Don Rohde built before he died. You can see that on my YouTube channel, RIP Don. If you can hear the sound of those two Clevelands, they do have a similar sound, but you can definitely hear a different idle with Glidden's car. And that's because it's got a lot more compression than my 409 at 13.3 or whatever it is. It's got a lot bigger cam, a lot more overlap. It's got a big tunnel ram that's worked out to the max. It's got two huge carburetors. When we talk about the 409 Cleveland making 775 horsepower, that's with a single 4 and a Dominator. Now add a worked over tunnel ram done by Glidden, two Dominator carburetors, big compression. I mean, that thing's gonna be making big power. And that's what I wanna show you. When you think about that 409 Cleveland that you saw, that peak power was 7,600. Now you look at Bob Glidden's, that peak power isn't going to come in at 7,600. It's coming in at 8,600 or more to take advantage of those huge Cleveland heads and that high RPM. Although the 409 Cleveland is a lot bigger, right, cubic inch wise, and those classes were based on pounds per cubic inch, right? You could be lighter if you had a smaller engine. Glidden ran a lot of 340, 343 range engines from what I've read. So those things are making huge power when you look at horsepower per cubic inch. I mean, I don't know. I would say, looking at the times, he's got to be making 800 something horsepower. I would say in the pro stock days, those engines made anywhere from, I'm going to guess, 725 to 825 or 30 in that range. Chime in. Tell me what you think. Now I'm going to kind of put it in perspective with today's modern camshafts. Now, the engine that I'm building with Tony Bischoff at BS is the DragBoss 427 all aluminum Cleveland engine. And it's got the secret A3 heads done by Darren Morgan. Again, it's going to be a single 4-barrel. Now the intake's going to come from Scott Cook in Australia. He did the Air Supremacy. He's making a custom one for us, a prototype, and Darren Morgan's going to work it over. Here's what it looks like on CAD design. Now let's talk about that camshaft. Now I told Tony Bischoff I wanted to make 850 horsepower with a single 4. Now the heads are flowing in the 400 range. You can look at those specs. I got a video on that. I'll put the links in the description of the different videos I've been talking about. But the cam I'm running is going to be, let's see, he said it was 277, 292 at 050. It's on a 113 separation angle. Lobe separation angle. Think about that. 110 to 113. Now it's moving that peak power way up there. The intake center line, though, is going to be at 111. So we're going to still start that intake lobe before the 113 if you put it in straight up. Now the lobe lift on that is 550 thousandths. On the DragBoss 427, we're going to use T&D 1.75 rocker arm ratio. Now multiply that, and it's coming up to like 963 lift. With those kind of specs, you need to have control over that. And that's going to be a whole different topic that we're going to get into, but I've just touched base to it. In this case, what we're going to use is a 904 lifter. These lifters here that Ford made are 875. Once you get to these big cams with these big profiles, you need big springs and big spring pressure, seat pressure and open pressure. The load is so big against the roller wheels, they made the lifters bigger diameter. There's a 904 and a 937 to try to compensate and deal with those pressures, because that load is spread out against that lifter wheel, but that pressure and those forces are through the whole valve train, from the push rod to the rocker arm to the springs to the guide to the valve stem itself. Trying to decrease those pressures with RPM, add the inertia in there, that's the secret. Putting it all together where you don't get valve flow, where those valves are going crazy at high RPM and there's no control. That's when you start whacking valves and pistons. One of the things that the Pro Stock guys did, and like I said, I'm just touching base on it because we're going to do another video on it, is valve train. To get things under control, they started using titanium valves compared to the stock steel valves or the aftermarket steel. They went to titanium. Just to give you an introduction, steel valves probably about 130 grams. These are probably like 80. Somewhere in there. I don't know the exact numbers. I'm not going to talk about it any further because we're going to do a whole nother video on that. Just to kind of tie things up, my point is this. You have to look at everything together to try to figure out how much horsepower they made to run the times that they did, because it's phenomenal when you look at the cubic inch size of those engines. You know, a good super stock engine might be making 2 horsepower per cubic inch, 2.3. You get into this crazy ultra stuff that Darren gets into and all these $1 million motors, those things might be making 3 horsepower per cubic inch. What was Glidden making? Look at the numbers. Let's try to figure it out. But now you know these Pro Stock cams, why they have that big duration and the big lift, because the more air and fuel you get in, the more power you make. The higher RPM you turn, the more velocity that you're going to pull on those cylinder heads, because it's not a power adder. There's no nitrous, there's no turbo. You need that atmospheric pressure and that draw from that piston coming down to fill those cylinders. There's probably a lot of things I forgot or didn't say. There's a lot more to talk about with valve train. I'm telling you right now, it's going to get good. Larry Olson's going to come on and do a rocker arm discussion about how to make horsepower with rocker arms and where to make the horsepower in that area where your lobe of that cam is working. Because when you change that rocker arm ratio, you change that lift on that lobe profile. We're getting into it. It's going to be good. When I got it into the house after I made this video, this is what I found. Big shout out to you, my family. I love you guys. Andrea, Elena, and Izzy. DBG. Like, subscribe, and share.
Dad, your video is too long. We're already in bed.
All right.
Because your videos are too long, you go hoo 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 to laugh. and then you burp like oh.
What?
Good
night. Love you.
Good night. Bye.